What's on the docket today? What will we document?
Hello and welcome to Doll Doc. Today's doll kicks off Freaky February. This month is seen as the month of love, and one thing I love is Halloween. So why not let it bleed into February? The doll I'll be making today was inspired by the video game Granny. I haven't played it yet, but I have seen the main antagonist character Granny, and she is frightening. So I thought, why not make a doll costume inspired by her? Before we make her scary costume, let's go ahead and make her pretty. I start off by color correcting a little bit with pastels and thinned out acrylic paint. I then lightly sketch on where I want her eyes and eyebrows. I decided to give her some bright blue eyes and made sure to add my waterline and darken up her lash line before coloring in her lips. I wanted this doll to be one that you could either have a scary costume on her, or you can take it off and have her just wearing some cute clothes. So she needs a face that's going to go under her creepy mask. When doing the irises, make sure to choose multiple colors, whether they're variations of the same colors or not. This makes them look a lot less flat. And with each new layer, don't forget to add more white to the eyes. Now let's give her some contour. And a little eyeshadow. I love this color on her. If you get any where you don't want it, just use your kneaded eraser and take it right off. Now for her pupils and some eyeliner. I love when it's time to add the black. It just makes everything pop. And I'm going to add eye shines with acrylic paint. Once these are dry, I'll add a layer of Liquitex gloss varnish to her irises and lips. Now for some hair. Oh my. So I had this first concept of just giving her this really light, blonde, straight, long hair. But then I was like, I do that with every doll. And so I wanted to try something different. So I thought maybe short hair and maybe make it super dark. But figuring out how to do it short as I wanted it was what was challenging me. And I decided to scrap a few of the darker hair versions I had. One with just laying black yarn down, and the other by creating this kind of copper flocking almost for her hair. Now, I did like the copper curly flocking look some, but it just didn't fit for this doll. I might use it in the future though. Then I went and I gave her a mohawk and some white flocking. I'm not sure exactly why, but I wasn't a fan of this either. And so I decided I would whip out my acrylic paint and paint her scalp white. I then decided to try the method I used for my male dolls and see if I could give her a pixie cut that way. I knew I wanted her hair super short, but I had never really done hair this short on a female doll. So I worked in layers, letting each one dry before adding the next. And when I got to the very end, I added on some hair but didn't put glue over it. That way the yarn stuck to it and hid all the glue underneath. Now let's give her some style. I used my hair trimmers again. And just remember to work very slowly and carefully while doing this. If you're nervous about it, try doing it with a wig cap first on a head that you haven't already done a face up. Or you can cover up the face with some cloth or plastic wrap. I just worked very slowly, taking off a little at a time, gradually getting shorter and shorter. And some edges I came in and cleaned up with some tiny scissors. Now she's looking stylish. Now that she's got her face and hair, let's get to her costume. I made some patterns for Granny's nightgown. And I started out by sewing together the shoulders. Then I sewed the cuffs to the sleeves and placed the sleeves onto the shoulders, right sides together, lining the middle of the sleeve up with the seam of the shoulder, before stitching together everything else closed and turning it right side out. I didn't hem the bottom and the neckline of the dress because I wanted them to look frayed. Then I broke out my alcohol inks and made two brown colors. One was a more yellowish brown and the other had a bit of a green tint to it. With a cotton swab, I just lightly dabbed on the color, trying to make it look stained and dirty. Make sure to get her cuffs and anywhere else that you think might have gotten some grime. I then go in and add this green color. I don't know why, but it just made it feel so much more creepy to have a little bit of green stains. If you ever get the color too dark, you can always go in and lighten it up with some plain alcohol. I use 91% isopropyl alcohol for this. I also went in and added a few splatters to the dress. Then I broke out my soft pastels to add a little more soot and dirt. If you get it too dark, add some more alcohol to it, blend it out some, and then I also ran it under the sink for a little bit, just because a few of the spots were too opaque for my liking. After I rinsed it, I then got an idea. I had a cup of green tea while I was working on this doll, and I still had the tea bag in the cup. So I decided, why not try some tea staining? We'll see how it goes. Then, very carefully with the tip of my nozzle, I added a little bit of dark brown to the edges of her dress, before making some more splatters with a brown red to look almost like old blood stains. Now onto her face. This was a big experiment. I had never made a latex mask for a doll. I've used latex for dolls in the past, but it's been for things like fins. And I was really hoping this would work out. I started by dabbing on the latex directly to the face. This latex is actually mixed with a little bit of acrylic paint. That way it dries opaque. Now I needed something that I could sculpt on top of the mask. And one of my favorite things to sculpt with for special effects makeup is latex paste. Now, this isn't something fancy you have to go out and buy at the store. It's literally just your basic liquid latex and usually a type of flour. My favorite flour to use to make the paste is rice flour, but I didn't have any on hand, so we're gonna do experiment number 2 and try it with coconut flour this time. I also got another little container that has a lid so I could store my leftover paint in between layers while it dries, and I didn't want my extra paste to just dry out. I added 2 tablespoons of my liquid latex. Then I'm gonna slowly add in my coconut flour. I think I started out with about 5/8 of a teaspoon. You want to add this gradually because coconut flour tends to soak up a lot of moisture. So if you add it too fast, you could come out with some really dry paste. Just take your time mixing well. Also, since it absorbs moisture, don't just add more coconut flour in right away after it's mixed. give it a good 30 seconds of mixing to see what the consistency is before you add anything else. I finally got it to a consistency I liked, so I decided let's give it a go. Now, sculpting with latex paste can take a little while to get used to, but one trick I use is using a silicone sculpting tool and wetting it with a little more liquid latex to help me smooth out whatever I'm sculpting. I built up her nose and wanted to give her a stronger, menacing brow bone. Also, avoid getting liquid latex on anything with fibers, hair, or cloth. It is almost impossible to get it out of those items. So for this, I'm just using a wooden craft stick and my silicone tools to lay it down. Also, I am wearing a shirt that I don't mind if it gets ruined. Now to build up that chin. And I was liking how the sculpting was going, but it was almost too much texture for me. So I decided to try out another ingredient. Now with this one, it wasn't soaking up the moisture, but almost felt like it was making the latex a little more liquidy. So I transferred it to a new container because I ended up having to add a lot more baking soda than I originally thought I would. Mix it on up, and you're gonna go for a consistency almost like icing. Not a thin icing, but you don't want super thick. Now that it's the consistency I wanted, I start sculpting again, building everything up. You can notice how some parts of her face where I've been sculpting are a little more yellow, and that's because when this particular liquid latex dries, it dries transparent, but it has a little bit of a yellow hue to it. So you can add a little bit of acrylic paint to it if you want. I ended up just going over the whole sculpt after I was done with more of my paint colored latex base that I used in the beginning, and that hid everything. Now when it's time to remove the mask, you'll want baby powder. Latex loves to stick to itself. It is a pain sometimes if you do not have baby powder. Also, if you're going for a more smooth skin look, I suggest letting the face actually cure for a few days, because that's gonna let the latex fully dry and it'll become a lot stiffer. So when you remove it, it's less likely to pucker and wrinkle. Now, since this was aged skin I was going for, I really wanted those wrinkles. So I let the top of my last latex layer dry, but it was still wet underneath, kind of like if you've ever smudged nail polish, how you touch it and you think the top is dry, but if you slide it or scratch it, it comes right off. And that helped as I was removing this mask to give her wrinkles. Make sure everything fits up nicely like you want. And also, I went over the ears of this mask because that's another thing that will help it stay on the doll's face better. Once I trimmed it up, I began adding some darker acrylic paint to deepen her wrinkles. Now, I felt like this left her more kind of dirty looking than really deep wrinkles, so I decided to go back over the face with a wash. Now, this looks very thick right now, but as it dries, the water and paint will actually seep down into all those wrinkles and crevices and darken them while still leaving the raised areas pretty light. And if they're too dark for you, you can always dry brush with a little more acrylic paint, which is what I ended up doing. Then I got out my soft pastels so I could deepen her eye sockets. For this doll, you can, and I do recommend, sealing the mask with MSC. You don't have to do it with every layer since you're not using watercolor pencils, but it is a good idea to give 1 or 2 coats at the very end, especially if you use soft pastels. Acrylics, it's a maybe not if you want to. I still would, but soft pastels on a latex mask, definitely use your Mr. Super Clear. I also went in with some red to her lips, under her eyes and nose, just because I felt like it gave her a little more menacing look. And I wanted those sockets nice and deep set. She's looking a little naked without some brows, so let's give her some of those. And I added a few wefts of white hair to the top of the mask. Now that her face will look aged, I also wanted her legs and arms to be aged as well. And this was experiment 3. I started off by wrapping the wrist joints in masking tape. After your wrists are wrapped, I just dunked them into some liquid latex. The legs were really fun to dunk. Now dunk your arms and legs further than what you're actually going to use for your final product. This will give you some extra to hold on to when you're removing them for the first time, and it'll allow you to cut a clean line. Once the latex was fully dry, I gave them another dunk. I got my container a little too full. Now, once layer 2 is done, I dabbed on some of that latex that was mixed with the acrylic paint already. And I'm not worried about getting this layer smooth because, again, we're trying to give texture to the skin since it's aged. And now she's dry. But her legs were a lot lighter than her face. So I went in with my alcohol inks and darkened them up some. I also dabbed on some color, different reds and darker browns. Now what happened with this is, since I diluted my alcohol ink, as it dried, it actually created this veiny-like lines that I loved and thought looked like spider veins. I then went in with a light layer of darker colored acrylic paint. This doesn't have latex in it, it's only acrylic paint. And I did this because if you look at aged skin, it's not really one uniform color most of the time. So I really wanted it to look natural and a little less clean. Like, this is an evil granny. She chases people around the house with a bat. She doesn't have clean feet. Now, speaking of her bat, I got out my air dry clay and began to sculpt a bat shape. To have a little more stability in it, I used a stick from a cotton swab and just molded everything around that. I let it dry and then added on some alcohol ink, doing one layer, and then it looked too bright and new, so I changed up my color a little bit and dabbed some more on. Now it's starting to look old and grimy. And since she is an evil granny that takes out people with her bat, I added some red alcohol ink, and then once that dried, I mixed my red alcohol ink with a little bit of my Liquitex gloss and put that on the bat so it looks fresh. Now that she's got her costume ready, let's get her dressed. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And also, if you aren't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell. I really hope you liked this Freaky February girl and can't wait to show you what I have coming up for Valentine's Day. Thanks for watching and keep creating.